Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the FilmOntario Town Hall. We have over 1,000 people registered, or almost 1,000 people registered this morning, and we do have a few people still joining. So we will start in just a minute, and hopefully the sirens that are in the background will have passed through by then as well. So just we ask your patience for just one more minute. I think that's my cue to begin. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the FilmOntario Member Town Hall. I'm Cynthia Lynch, Managing Director at FilmOntario and the host for this session. Before I turn this over to our moderators, a few notes. So you should be able to see today's panelists and our board members on screen. As we move through today's session, there will be a few people joining us and leaving, so that those pictures will change. We will use the chat function for sharing links for useful resources as they come up. And we do want you to ask questions, so we ask that you use the Q&A function, which you see in the middle of your screen. It's two little talking boxes with Q&A at the bottom. We will try to get as many questions as possible, but we do have almost 1,000 participants today, so we might not get to all of them. If your question doesn't get answered today, please feel free to reach out to me anytime at clynch@filmontario.ca. Now I'm going to turn things over to our FilmOntario co-chairs, Sue Milling of Actor Toronto and Jennifer Jonas of New Reel Films. Over to you, Sue.
Thank you, Cynthia, and welcome everyone to the FilmOntario Town Hall. So although we are meeting virtually, we'd like to acknowledge that Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, the Haudenosaunee, and the land. The treaty was created to share and protect what is still their traditional territory. This area around the Great Lakes represents the dish that we all feed from, and we must share with one spoon. Subsequent Indigenous nations, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect for the land we now share. We are all treaty people who have a responsibility to maintain the spirit of the dish with one spoon covenant. I also want to share with you a statement that FilmOntario released against anti-Black racism. FilmOntario stands in solidarity with Black and Indigenous communities and people of color across the industry and the globe. We recognize the racial injustices that are pervasive throughout society. We stand for inclusion. We oppose all forms of racism and racialized violence. As a part of the film and television industry, we acknowledge that we have the power and the responsibility to use our platform, our agency, and privilege to fight for inclusion, accountability, and change. That includes representation in business, on screen, and behind the camera. We will support our members as they continue to find ways to champion BIPOC creators and voices in the screen industry. We will amplify the necessity for justice, healing, and opportunity for these communities. We are listening, researching, reading, and considering the additional steps that we need to take to turn our support into action. So Cynthia says there are almost 1,000 members who are going to be with us today on this town hall. And on behalf of the Film Ontario board, thank you. Thank you for joining us and for your continued support of Film Ontario. While this has not been an easy time for us as an industry or a society as a whole, we know from our history as an organization that we always are stronger when we work together. It has been encouraging over the past 13 weeks to see how people from across the industry, including many members on this call, have come together not only to support each other, but also to support our communities through PPE donations, mask sewing, opening up their spaces to food banks, and many, many other initiatives. As we start to see parts of our economy and production open back up in various parts of the province, and we hope soon in Toronto too, we wanted to take this opportunity to provide you with some updates on our advocacy activities. We're going to hear first today from Mayor John Tory and Councillor Paula Fletcher, then from Film Ontario board members John Weber, David Carter, Jason Mosek, Monty Montgomery, and Vanessa Steinmetz. The rest of the Film Ontario board is available to assist all of us in answering your questions. And then we hope to be joined later in this call by Minister MacLeod, Minister of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture Industries. So I want to start this morning by welcoming Mayor Tory. You know, very early on in the production shutdown, Mayor Tory convened a roundtable of film and television industry leaders to hear from us about the impact that this shutdown was having on our businesses. I had the opportunity to join that roundtable on behalf of Actor Toronto and talk about the devastating impact that the pandemic was having on performers and workers in our gig economy. And I want to thank you, Mayor Tory, for listening so well during that roundtable. It was no surprise to anyone that the mayor made reaching out to our industry a priority. He's been a strong supporter of our sector since becoming mayor in 2014, advocating on our behalf and promoting the sector both here and in Los Angeles. So Mayor Tory, thank you for joining us today. I have some questions for you, and I'm sure our members have many as well. But before we get to those, I'd like to give you an opportunity to say a few opening words. Over to you.
Well, thank you, and I'll be very brief. First of all, just to say that I acknowledge the fact that the impact of this. There are many sectors that get talked about, and frankly, I think restaurants and bars, and that's not to diminish the extraordinary, circumstances they've been through the last number of weeks, but they tend to be more visible because they have a storefront location. But I think if you look at the film business and you look at even artists and so on, there's been a huge devastation that has been brought about as a result of the pandemic. And I'm glad we had the consultation early on, because it really helped me, for example, to be able to advocate to the federal government, and I think in a positive way, and I probably wasn't the only one advocating, but I was one, with respect to the structure of some of the emergency programs, because that's one of the things that was brought up loud and clear, that a lot of people were not, for example, in a situation where they were incorporated and could take advantage of some of those provisions because they were kind of, one-person businesses and this kind of thing that wouldn't ordinarily have qualified for a lot of the kinds of programs. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope that a lot of the members and people that are represented here today were able to take advantage of those programs and are continuing to be able to do so. And there were a variety of other things issues that came up, and that includes even things like the necessity of us issuing permits quickly for some of the capital projects that are going on in terms of studio and stage space and so on, which we've been trying to stay on top of. But I'll want to hear from you on that today in terms of whether we're doing our job properly, because I think what people were already doing, and I was happy about this. I mean, the one thing, it was early on before people got really fatigued with all this, but people were looking ahead and sort of saying, well, look, what we want to be in a position to do is when we reopen, we want to be in a position to sort of, because people described literally how people just walked off production sites as they had to do on a given day and just left, but that they were obviously expecting they were going to come back and finish, whatever was in midstream, but that we also had to have, some of these permits issued so we could get on with some of these important construction projects. And I will just say that I know the film office, under the leadership of Marguerite and Magali and the people you know so well, have been very busy during the shutdown, making sure, for example, that there are extra sites available so that when production resumes, assuming there will be some compression as between things that are being finished and things that we're supposed to start, that we, have as broad a latitude as possible for people to have sites to do their work and to do their shoots and so forth. And I'll also say that, we're kind of ready to go in the context of marketing the business. I mean, what we do in terms of going to Los Angeles, for example, which I'm happy to do at the drop of a hat any day, is going to be guided by what you say is going on there and what's going on with us and what we have to say, because we want to go and we're ready to sort of say that we're ready and that we are sort of welcoming the world back here and so forth and so on. So I'll just finish by saying, and I know Paul is going to say a word, I remain deeply committed to this business. And it isn't just about jobs. I mean, yes, that's really important. There's a whole bunch of people that rely on it and will continue to rely on it. I know it's been an easier time to some extent for the post-production, part of the business, but now they may have some tough times now in light of the pipeline not being as full of things that were not being done during the spring and late winter months when we were kind of closed down. But I remain committed to it because as well, I think it is, it's just so fundamental in so many different ways, but in terms of an outlet for the creativity of people here, a sign of our kind of continuing welcome for artists and creative people. And it's proving to be, I think, with some of the educational programs, which again are going to pick up and some never stopped, I think a great place where we can sort of prove that we are trying to do better than, or that may be the wrong way to put it, but we're trying to be leaders when it comes to inclusion and that kind of thing. And I think some of these initiatives I brag about with, I think, justified pride, that we are, doing very well at kind of really trying to reach out and make sure that our industry here is more representative than it might be in other places. So I thank you for all that. I thank the government of Ontario because frankly, without the financial assistance that comes through FilmOntario and so on, we would have difficulty competing, because I remember them telling me my first trip as mayor, it's not about the money, but then again, it really is all about the money. So you have to have all the other table stakes, the talented people, and all of which we have in spades, but you also have to have the money there to make sure that people feel that it's financially viable for them to shoot and produce and post-produce here. And so I thank the government for that, and I'll look forward to answering some questions if I can. I might have to seek out assistance from Marguerite and Magali, who are not on a speaking platform here on this Zoom panel, but they are available by text. So we'll get to the questions after maybe Paula says a word. Thank you very much. Perfect.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. And we are going to drill down a little bit into some of the themes that you raised, but we would like to welcome Councillor Paula Fletcher, who's chair of the City of Toronto Film, Television and Digital Media Board, and another champion of our industry who is here with us today. So Paula, over to you for a few minutes, please. We'll just get you off mute.
Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you this morning. And I just want to thank our mayor because he is such a strong advocate for this industry. It is in his DNA now. And every decision, every thought about reopening, he's always got the film, television, digital media industries at forefront. And also just to the entire industry, because there's really no industry that can just really pull together like yours. It's always inspiring to see everyone from different walks of life, different parts of the industry come together, create a path, and clear that path for success and recovery. We recently had our board meeting digitally for the Toronto Film, Television, Digital Media Board, and we had a great participation from all the members of the industry. And we had Saad Rafi come, and he is leading the City of Toronto's recovery and rebuild team. I think you probably know that Marguerite is one of his right-hand people on that team. And the industry was able to lay out to Saad Rafi the importance of film, television industry for the City of Toronto, and ensuring that the city as well clears a pathway to get this industry up and running as quickly as possible. And we also heard from the members all the work that you're doing in thinking ahead. It's really so impressive and very exciting. During these tough times, having that roadmap that you're creating is really essential. As Mayor mentioned, we are making sure and keeping an eagle eye on all those applications for studios and other improvements in the industry to be fast-tracked, to move to the front of the line, to get fixed, to get done, and get built. And I just want to share with you an exciting moment this week on Monday morning where I was witness to the cement pour for the new Studio City. And with your support, we did buy that site back. We bought the Showline Studios site, And a number of years later, that new studio is coming into fruition. So it's a testament to the strength of this industry, the strength of your resolve, and along with the mayor and other members of City Council, we are 100% in support of this really critical economic driver for our city and our province. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Mayor Tory. You know, that's good news, you know, in terms of the studio, and you know, I want to talk a little bit more about looking ahead. So, of course, you know, the biggest question on everybody's mind is, you know, when will the City of Toronto move into stage 2 and be open to film and television production? But, you know, we know that that's going to be determined by public health and by the province. So, you know, we won't start there unless you've got some news that you would like to, you know, share with us in this town hall that we haven't heard yet. But I think, you know, what we would like to hear more about is the Office of Recovery and Rebuild. And so, Mr. Mayor, if you could just sort of, you know, talk to us a little bit about sort of how the film and television industry sort of fits into the plans of that office and just the kinds of things that you're hearing.
Well, first of all, I don't have any announcements to make or secrets to share, but you know, I do listen. I talk to a lot of people. I'm very much aware of what the numbers are, both here and in Peel, which are the two places where, you know, things have not been reopened. And I would just say, as a matter of prudence for the members of the industry to get ready, that it's going to come very soon. I do not think it's a long way away. And so I just think that if people are needing to take steps to be ready to resume production pursuant to the new rules, and I gather you've got your own sort of health and safety code that's kind of a modified version of what you had previously. I gather that we have said that we have access to public health in Toronto. If you don't have direct access, we can help you with that. Our film office can. So I would just say, you know, take the steps now. And by that, I mean like today and tomorrow. And you know, as I say, I don't know a date, but I just am surmising from everything I see in terms of even most recent presentations of numbers that things are improving sufficiently that it's not that far away, which is good. For business and good generally, if we can sort of see things improve on the health front. The Office of Recovery and Restart was set up so that we could do two things. The restart part really applies more to the city government. And I think the Film Office, because it has a very, you know, narrow and precise mandate, is on top of this. And so that re-permitting and green lighting of things from our end, I think they are ready, and I think they are in a position to be able to do that. It's been mentioned a couple of times by Paula and me that we're certainly going to be sort of very conscious of in the medium term, the projects that have to go forward, but those are medium term as opposed to right away. And then the public health part, which is how is business going to change in terms of how things happen on the locations. I gather that there's been quite a lot of work done by the industry on that in terms of building on an existing chapter of your code that exists. But we are there to make sure that that gets clarified. And the days to be clarifying that are like today, tomorrow, and the next day, as opposed to 2 weeks from now, because I think hopefully people will be back at it. The only thing that I think is a real imponderable in all this, and you've seen the news on that, and we don't control this, and I have no other insight into it, is the border, which I know, you know, causes certain challenges for you and for us. And you saw what Mr. Trudeau said yesterday about July 21st. And again, based on everything I hear, I don't think that is going to come in a more favorable direction towards us. I just think that is a date that is mindful of what's going on in the US, which is quite different than here in terms of some of the trends in the numbers. So my real message is to say, please use us, you know, to take the time now on especially the health requirements that are going to be go forward, so that you can be clear on all of those, as clear as anybody could be. And then the day that we are all greenlit to be moving forward into stage 2, that you're ready to go if you're ready to go. Yeah, I don't know if that helps you. And that's what the recovery part of the office is doing. The restart is our end, which is making sure the city government's ready to be responsive to you, not just on permitting from Film Office, but everything we do to support you, including the transportation department and others who I know help facilitate on location things. And then the recovery part is meant to look at sort of issues that we can be helpful with. And if there are some of those that don't just relate to the new conditions of work, as it were, let us know. I mean, we want to be supportive. We're not able to be throwing a lot of money around any more so than I presume is the government of Ontario, because we have our own financial problems, but we certainly are wanting to facilitate the successful reentry of everybody back into their business and getting going again as quickly as possible.
You know, I think one of the things that you know, that you pointed out is that, you know, we work best when we work together. So I think, you know, we welcome being part of that conversation in terms of, you know, what the recovery what the recovery will look like. I think, we're all mindful of the additional costs that that productions, will be looking at, and the challenges that, help us to ensure that people are going to be going back to work safely. So, as you say, we've been working as an industry to develop guidelines around the return to work. We're going to talk about those a little bit later on in this call. But I guess sort of wondering whether, there will be additional requirements that the city would put in place, or, just sort of, additional steps that you can imagine that would be required, or, will you look to the industry and the work that we've been doing?
First of all, I think as I'm told, the industry has been included deliberately at the request of people like Councillor Fletcher and myself, because when we set up the recovery part of the office, which is the sort of period on the go forward and what additional requirements are going to be set and so on, we asked that because of the importance and the complexity, frankly, of all the moving parts and all the different players, that the film industry be specifically consulted. And I'm told they've been kind of represented at every table. You have been. And if that's not so, and you don't feel like you've been adequately heard, then you should let me and Councillor Fletcher know, and we'll see to that, because it's still time. I mean, we haven't reopened yet, but I think it's coming soon. I will just say to you that, and I stand to be corrected, and I could be corrected by text by either Magali or Marguerite if we've had specific additional Toronto-focused requirements to be placed on people beyond what you have in the general sort of public health provincial guidelines, we've put material out to indicate that, like by now. We're not waiting around to sort of say, oh, gee, the day after we reopen, we're going to send you a note saying, oh, there were 12 other things we wanted you to do. And so I stand to be corrected on that, but I think what you've heard is what you're going to hear. And there are questions of interpretation, and there are questions of gray zones and so on, which that's why I said you can work through the film office or directly with Toronto Public Health, but they're more than happy to facilitate that discussion, as we're doing with other industries, to make sure that those kinds of questions get answered, because you're a unique position where it's not an office you're dealing with and how to space out desks. It's something much more complicated. So I would just say to you, if there are people that feel, but if you haven't got, one of the things we can pride ourselves on is this recovery office has produced guidelines for nail salons and hair salons and restaurants and bars and people like that. And they've got detailed pages of stuff that they have to do. It's a bit frightening in a way, but if there was stuff coming out in that regard for the film industry, you would have it, by now, because that's what we've been doing through that office. So if there are specifics, then bring them to my attention or Paula's, and we'll make sure they get dealt with through the film office or public health or both.
Right. Yeah, I think we have a very good relationship with the film office. I think the board members and our members, and I think definitely we'll be working together. So that's great. Earlier in the call, Mr. Mayor, you mentioned the work that you have done, on behalf of the industry in Los Angeles, and promoting the city of Toronto as a location for production. I think that promotion and that work in building confidence of people to come back to the city is going to be, extraordinarily important. And as in Actor Toronto, you have also said diversity is our strength. So we're at an interesting time for us to be able to not just talk about the depth and breadth and diversity of our cast and crew and the services that we provide here, but also the safety, as we bring people back. So I'm just, maybe you could talk a little bit about, sort of your plans in terms of promoting Toronto as a filming jurisdiction and a destination, and the message that I think you would hope that we could help to convey to our international partners, about the city and those efforts.
Well, first of all, I think there's a small perception, and I say small because anything Canadian is always small in the United States, but I think there's a small perception, but it does exist, that we have come through this, and I'm touching wood when I say this, better than has been the case in the United States. And who knows why that is? There's a whole bunch of factors at play, probably some of which are beyond our own control, but I think we've managed this fairly well. And I think as a result, we're not having to dig ourselves out of a hole as deep as perhaps might be the case elsewhere. And I think as we have to make that better known, and make known the fact that we've managed not just the sort of the emergency itself, but the post-pandemic period as it unfolds. We are going to be embarking at the right time. And, it's like everything else. In business, I certainly learned that you're better off not to embark on some big marketing campaign until you have the product to back it up. So I think as we see ourselves restart, and as we see ourselves getting on with some of these projects, and even like the concrete pouring the other day, so people know it's real. And as we see our ability to deal with the workforce related issues and the safety issues, there will come a time that there's a plan, I know, from the film office to have a sort of marketing campaign, mostly done in the initial stages, obviously online, aimed at the American end of the industry. And that, of course, relates to questions of the border as well, to say we're open, ready for business, it's safe here, it's healthy here, and so forth and so on. But you want to be able to make sure that you can back that up. So I'm not saying we're going to procrastinate on it. I'm just saying there'll be timing is everything. And I'd like to hope we can work with the Ontario government on that, because again, we are the biggest beneficiaries of activity that takes place in Ontario, and I'm all for one and one for all. I want to see the industry healthy, because I know a lot of the Toronto people, get employed in shoots and productions that take place in other parts of the province, and that's all good. It's all good for the industry. So then with regard to a mission down there, I think we've talked about taking kind of a different sort of mission this year, maybe of necessity because of all these rules that are now in place and just the realities of that. But I stand ready to go with whatever group I should go with, and to see whoever I should see. If you said tomorrow morning, I'm ready to go. I'm not hesitant about traveling, because I think it's important. And so I think that between all of that, and then just being ready so that when people come back here to resume things they left off on, where we don't have to lure them, what we've got to do is fill the pipeline back up and make sure that we're kind of dealing with some of the decisions going forward. And I think there will be, for two reasons. One, competitive. I mean, Los Angeles, for example, which had its own problems with the pandemic, are going to be competing to fill up their own studios first, and going around telling people things like that. And second, there's going to be a bit of complication to traveling for a while, or even an anxiety about that. We've got to sort of address all of that as best we can. So I'm just there to be helpful, as is Paula, as is the board, as is the office. We have a campaign that's ready to go to market us as a desirable place to do these things. We have the ability to go and say to people, we're doing what you told us to do, including all the programs that will resume, like the Film Assistant Program, which is aimed at diversifying the makeup of some of the younger people in the business. The workforce study is going to pick up where it kind of had to leave off because of the city hall closing down, and all those things, because they told us, get your people deeper and broader, get your facilities deeper and broader. They told us to do these things, the people that are our customers, and we're doing them. And it's just a matter of us selling that message that it's actually happening. So we're ready to go on all that. I've even got my little button on right here. I put it on the collar of my shirt so you can see that I wear it at all. I wear it to sleep at night, just because I want to get you folks that are watching out there as busy as you can possibly be as quickly as possible, because I think that is good for you, and it's good for the business, and it's good to show our American friends we're ready to go. So I'm in your hands in that regard, but also we've got people and plans ready to execute.
That's great. That's very reassuring. Thank you. I know we don't have unlimited time with you and Councillor Fletcher. I'm wondering, Cynthia, if there are a couple of questions that perhaps we can ask the mayor before.
Lob one to Paula, just because I want to sort of check out the answer.
So I think this is a question that both of you can answer, and Mayor, you actually touched on it briefly, so maybe Paula can start and then you can fill in. But just a question about training. And as you alluded to, Mayor, the city has committed to doing a lot of work in partnership with the industry and with the unions, and through the XOTO schools program, to do some of that training that will increase diversity in the sector and help us reach out to some people who are underrepresented in specific categories. So I know that that's been adjusted a little bit for the summer about the XOTO schools program, but I'm wondering if once we get back to work, will some of those city-run programs also be up and running again? I'll start with Councillor Fletcher. You're on mute.
I'm off mute now. Thank you. Thanks very much. Of course, this has been a real hit for the pandemic, because training is so important, and the TESS, who's doing a lot of our work, have been doing many other things. So refocusing on the training plans that we have through our workforce development at XOTO and the film office will have to happen as soon as we can get back to that. I know that even the XOTO schools program, which trains a number of young individuals from schools, has been paused because, of course, they're not in schools and there's nowhere for them to go. I know that NAGLI in particular is looking at what the restart would be for the training. I think we are very much committed to that. even more so now with Black Lives Matter and anti-Black racism very much on the agenda. So I think sorry, I just lost my feed there for a second. This is something really critical, and there will be an online component for XOTO schools during the summer. And I think I'm off again. Sorry about that.
We can hear you.
I'm running out of battery, Cynthia. You can hear me. I'm running out of battery. People are texting me. So I think it's got to be up and running again. It's on the front burner. It's very important. When we went to Los Angeles, we actually heard that you got to get it together up there. We need you to have a diversity plan in the city of Toronto if we're going to continue to come and film in Toronto. So that was set in place. It's on pause. The start button will be pressed very shortly on that.
And just to add one thing, the start button in part will depend on the level of activity in the industry, because obviously a lot of these things, as you know, depend on kind of what I'll call, for nothing lack of a better word, co-op kind of placements. So as production resumes, it'll allow us with that production assistant program and things like that. And Magali and Marguerite tell me that we have a full roster of training programs slated for 2021. And it's not to sort of say, well, we're just postponing it because we're slothful. It's because the anticipation is the level of activity will have built back up by the time we get to the beginning of 2021 to actually have the places to put people to get the actual on-site experience. So, but we're ready, as the counselor said, we're sort of ready to go with these things as schools open and as different things happen. So we're ready to go. It's important. And great partnership with the unions too, by the way. I mean, I tell people that story all over the place, even in phone calls I have and so on. I think they still continue to be impressed as I am, the fact that we have such a great partnership with our unions in delivering these programs. They're indispensable.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and Councillor Fletcher, both for being with us today, but for everything that you do with our sector. We know, I think we're at our time with you, but just before you leave, just wondering if you have any last words or concluding remarks that both of you would like to make to the members today on this call.
Paula, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm going to unmute. There we go. I just think it's great that you're having this call. It's a fantastic way to bring everybody together and hear the stage that we're at, and actually to hear from the mayor, who's very involved in the day-to-day restart operations, has his finger on that pulse as to the timing, and understand that I just want to tell everybody who's on this call from the industry that you need to be very proud of all of the leaders in your industry who have been really carefully putting a production together, and the production is the restart of this industry, as only you can do. So I'm looking forward to being back in the saddle and all of you back at work and doing the great things that you do as soon as possible. Thank you.
I don't know how I can do any better than that. And Councillor Fletcher is, if I'm ever sliding and not paying 100% attention to the industry, she makes sure that I get snapped back to paying attention. But may I just say, I'm 1,000% committed to helping you get back to where we were. I mean, this city was doing so well when the pandemic hit in so many different areas, tech and film and TV production and so forth. And it involves so many creative people and so many people who, kind of operate on their own with their talents, but they're not in big companies and didn't have access to a lot of, kind of cushions. So if there are things that, that are what I'll call sort of collateral damage that happened along the way, you need to bring these things to our attention, because, we try to be on top of this, especially Marguerite and Magali, who do such a great job for us. But, bring it to my attention and to theirs, that there are things where people have fallen between the cracks and somehow need just a little bit of support to get back on their feet, because that's what we want. And I'm just there for you. I'm there to travel, to speak for you, to advocate for you, including to the other governments as necessary, but they're behind you too. So let's just get on with a successful restart, and it'll be something that'll take a little bit of time, but I think we can be back up to kind of full speed before too long, and I'll do anything I can to help, and I'll just look forward to doing all the things that we were doing before and making all the progress we were making. So thank you for having us on, and we'll look forward to being in touch.
Great, thank you both, and many thanks to the staff of the film office as well. We will be ready to roll, and we will be ready together. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Have a great meeting. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you both for your stalwart support and expertise.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, so now we're going to turn to the Film Ontario update part of the meeting. We will start with an update on some of the advocacy we have done to date, including the Minister's Film and Television Advisory Panel, then talk about the work that has been happening around health and safety, and then look forward to the consultation that the Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs is doing right now, and a possible fall provincial budget. So for the first part of the conversation, I would like to introduce John Weber of Take 5 Productions and David Carter from EP Canada. In addition to their role as Film Ontario's board members, John and David are both members of Minister MacLeod's Film and Television Advisory Panel and are also co-chairs of that panel's subcommittee, John for building capacity and David for tax credit modernization. David, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us what were some of the first things that Film Ontario turned its mind to when the economic shutdown hit us in mid-March?
Sure. Well, with the sudden industry shutdown, our thoughts immediately went to the financial impact of individuals and businesses. In the early days, we advocated very strongly for government support for all of our impacted workers. So EI type support for people, not just employees, also people working self-employed, independent contractors, and people working through their loan-outs. So we worked with many of our industry partners, the unions, all advocating for the very same thing. And we got that success when CERB was introduced, which was offered to all impacted workers. So that was a real big win for individuals. Even subsequent tweaks helped people out when they were allowed to earn up to $1,000 a month and not have their CERB benefits affected. So we were pleased with that. And then on the business side, nearly the important cash flow was to the industry, absolutely critical to the industry. So we pushed for a fast tracking and early release of tax incentives, the tax credits that were in the queue. And we had a big success there when that actually happened in April. It was a big cash inflow injection to the industry. And we really need to thank Canada Revenue Agency in Ontario Creates for their support in that, and in particular, Pierre Mercier from Ottawa, who really helped out with that. We've been advocating for other things like producers who were shut down early to make sure that they are entitled to tax credits on their costs that they incurred before up to the shutdown, even if they didn't meet certain criteria, and tax credits on unexpected costs that happen during the shutdown. There's been other initiatives like the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which has unique aspects that the film industry has that we've been working. The interesting thing is though, in all this, we didn't have to get Minister MacLeod's attention because she wanted our attention. Within a few days of the shutdown, she convened the very first meeting of the advisory panel, and we've met almost weekly ever since. So that has been tremendously beneficial. All the stakeholders have come together. It's been tremendous collaboration and cooperation working together with her and with the Ontario Creates team that come together every week for that meeting as well.
Awesome, thanks, David. John, can you give us some background on the advisory panel? How did it start and what is the mandate?
Sure, thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, so the panel was, it was originally introduced in the 2019 provincial budget as a joint culture and finance panel. Minister MacLeod initiated the panel earlier this year. She asked Jim Mercopoulos from Cinespace to chair the committee alongside Christina Jennings from Shaftesbury, who's the vice chair of the committee. And the first meeting was held on February 13th this year. Film Ontario was invited to be part of the panel. David Carter, Cynthia, and I were initially invited by the minister to participate in that. And we received the terms of reference for the panel, and the mandate initially was, and I'll just read this, was to provide evidence and advice on industry trends, challenges, and opportunities to grow high-value film and television production in Ontario and to maximize benefits for the province. So for those of you who've heard the Premier speak many times to our industry, he has often talked about how he'd like to see this industry be a $5 billion industry. And this panel was, established to help, develop with government that roadmap to that level. And the original mandate was to present a cost-neutral recommendations to support the industry, which was initially targeted for the fall economic statement in 2021. There's 4 subcommittees on the panel. One is Film and Television Tax Credit Committee, Building Capacity and Infrastructure. There's a Workforce Development Subcommittee, and Canadian Stories and Intellectual Property subcommittees. And each of those subcommittees, which were established, have chairs and co-chairs. I'm leading, as Jennifer said, the Building Capacity subcommittee. And just as an example, I mean, each of the committees did reach out to stakeholders within their respective subcommittee to give input into our recommendations. So as an example, on our committee, which I chair with Nisha Ali of Spin VFX, we did meet with all the studio operators and formed kind of a subcommittee to kind of get the best intel that could form the recommendations that we were going to put forth to our chairs. So that's kind of, you know, how that committee was comprised.
And how did that change, or did it once COVID hit?
No, it did. It did and it didn't. I mean, the committee still remained intact. The goalpost just shifted as a result of obviously the urgent nature of trying to make sure that our industry was able to sustain itself and try and build a plan to recover. So the committee fully remained intact. If anything, it actually ramped up the amount of work that we did. We had a bit more of a laser focused approach on really trying to mitigate the damage and trying to build a plan to protect companies, protect suppliers, protect our artists, our people, and also make sure that we could come out of this in kind of a healthy manner. So as part of that, the minister added some labor representation to the panel. Sue Milling from ACTRA, Monty from 873, IAT 873, and Jason from NABET. Were also invited by the minister to join the panel. The minister also had similar panels for all of her 14 different sectors within the ministry. And what she asked of all of the different sectors was for them to provide a standardized report, basically looking for ideas on how the government could return to work and recover from the economic damage through this pandemic period. The mandate still that we did receive new terms of reference, and they did continue to have a cost neutral solutions. And we were asked to prepare a report. So once again, the subcommittees that I mentioned earlier, those 4 subcommittees that are part of our industry subcommittee, went back to our stakeholders, and we looked for their input again with a bit more of a targeted focus, you know, really to look at, you know, what do we recommend to the province in terms of support we need to get each of these different areas supported by government so that we can return healthy. We submitted a new report to government on May 28th, which is currently under review and discussions. We've had a couple follow-up calls with the government with some questions that they've put forward to the chairs to really address some clarifications. And, you know, I think I really feel that everybody's done a ton of heavy lifting on this committee in a really short period of time. And I feel that we've put together some, you know, I think exceptional recommendations, and the government's been a great partner in all of this, in listening to us and hearing our suggestions. And there's ongoing dialogue, and but certainly a lot of attention being given to us on that. So that's how kind of things shifted with COVID, Jennifer.
Great recap. David, could you tell us a bit about how the panel decided to address the terms of reference?
Sure. Well, as John mentioned, I was the co-chair along with Brian O'Leary from NBC Universal on the streamlining and modernizing tax credits subpanel. We really just focused on answering the main gist of the question, which was what short-term and long-term ideas do we have that will help us emerge from, recover, and prosper from this situation. So each of the 4 groups developed their own short-term and long-term recommendations, and we all came together and compared and identified any overlaps, and brought the assets together and prioritized and came up with the final report, which I broke things down between short-term and long-term, which I think we're going to go through a few details later. Above all, though, we highlighted the 2 critical key areas which the industry felt it wanted to highlight, which was the need for financial assistance to cover those new incremental health and safety costs, COVID prevention costs that each producer is going to be facing, which some estimate to be as high as 10 to 15% of the budget. So that is an urgent issue. And the other urgent issue that Vanessa will be talking about is the insurance coverage, which producers desperately need a solution on, because the financial costs of a potential COVID-related shutdown are enormous, and insurance coverage is enough for other producers to move forward. We the report kind of focused on the two big pluses, which is the tremendous contribution that the industry is making all across the province. To illustrate that point, we showed the spectacular growth across all of Ontario's 5 regions. Over a 10-year period, one of the 5 regions saw a growth of 10 times the amount of taxable earnings paid out to employees in the region, and the other 4 regions in Ontario saw anywhere from double to quadruple growth in the amount earned. So it really is an Ontario success story that we were highlighting, and also focusing on that we could be one of the industries to get back contributing to the economy quickly, where we can quickly react, as opposed to some of the industries that might be a little slower to come back and contribute after our immediate issue is resolved, or after we start up and running again.
And can you give us a general overview of what the panel's recommendations were?
Yes, I can. Some will be covered. I'll go through them quickly, or high level. So on the tax credit front, we just want to confirm that those COVID-19 shutdown costs will be tax credit eligible. We want to revise the process so that the release of tax credit refunds are accelerated on a go-forward basis. We want to improve and simplify the residency criteria in Ontario. We want to build and add production capacity in Ontario by making location fees tax credit eligible. Right, we recognize that as a quick fix to, as our studio operators are expanding. We feel that that would be a way of getting an expansion to the ability to handle more capacity. We need some assistance on covering the health and safety costs that I mentioned on both the domestic and production services front. On the building capacity issue, it's pursuing an insurance backstop issue and getting that insurance resolved. Opening up government-owned buildings to filming, identifying spaces that are currently underutilized, like something like the Metro Toronto Convention Center, which we're not probably going to be hosting conventions anytime in the immediate future, but that could be turned into a filming space and employ the workers that are actually employed by there. So using those underutilizing space, encouraging municipalities to prioritize fast track construction permits for new studio builds. Important to the animation and visual effects industry is a little bit behind in terms of they were working while most production workers were their point period coming up now, as there's nothing in the production pipeline for them to work on. So we asked that the federal government extend the emergency wage subsidy through to November, which is probably going to be when they're going to be not working. Workforce development, we want to open up the government existing apprenticeship and training programs.
Sorry, Jennifer.
That may have expired during the shut.
I'm just going to interject for a minute because David has been breaking up quite a bit. I'm not sure,
have
David. Yeah,
Oh.
so I don't know if John, we could ask you to tag team in a bit to talk about the medium to long term asks.
Okay.
Sure. David, do you want to try one more time, or do you want to carry on? And if you're breaking up, I'll step in.
Okay. Is that any better? I don't know.
That's much better.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't really too far. Okay. So
No.
no,
Okay.
still.
So I think I'll just jump in, and David, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But I mean, in the I think we're kind of at the workforce development area. Part of the request there on the workforce development was opening up some of the existing government apprenticeship and training programs to the film and television industry, ensuring that all workforce licenses that might have expired during the shutdown period remain valid for a reasonable amount of time. Things like updating the Highway Traffic Act to reduce the need for paid duty officers, Those are some of the workforce development ones that we felt would help the industry. From the IP subcommittee, we asked the province to acknowledge the importance of our industry to Ontario's economy. That's obviously something we constantly ask, but it's something we've placed heavy, I think, import on during this period. We've ensured that there's flexibility for distributors in obtaining film classification from any Canadian province. And some of the medium to longer term asks include reinstating the IP development fund, which was a fund that was in place several years ago to help develop content here in the province.
I love
Updating the triggers and the tax credits to make sure that shows on all streaming platforms are now eligible, making location fees, as David said earlier, eligible, and supporting work from home and online training opportunities. Obviously, you know, we're on a Zoom call now, so I think we see remote workplaces being part of our future, and we're looking for support in those initiatives. So some of those include making sure that the Ontario Animation VFX post-production companies that have employees working at home, that those costs and fees remain eligible for the O-case tax credit, even if the work is not necessarily taking place at the company's workforce. So a lot of this is just really making sure that the tax credit programs, working with Ontario Creates, making sure that all of the I guess support mechanisms in place have been updated to reflect the reality of the world that we're living in as we come out of kind of this pandemic period. So, David, I hope I answered your questions, picked up there correctly, but I think
you did. Is that any better? I just switched to a mic. Am I sounding better?
Yeah,
okay,
that's
good.
better. All right, thanks to both of you. That is a big list. John, can you explain how Film Ontario can build on its own advocacy?
Sure. So not unlike the subcommittees and and the panel that we just talked about. I mean, Film Ontario has also met numerous times. I will give a shout out to Cynthia. It's been amazing, kind of leading this organization during kind of this crazy time. It's been a ton of heavy lifting, and I know everybody's a little bit zoomed out on all of this stuff, but it's been amazing, and I think Film Ontario's stepped up. We obviously work incredibly closely with Ontario Creates and with all levels of government. We're for sure benefiting from the work of the subcommittee and the Minister's Advisory Panel. But we feed into that, and we have obviously several people that I mentioned on this board that works with that committee. So we're very closely tied in terms of how we're approaching government on those asks. However, Film Ontario, we're also not limited by the terms of reference of that committee. So some of the items, that committee asked for kind of no cost recommendations to government. Film Ontario, we don't always stick to that. We will, kind of go to government and make recommendations that may have a cost to them, and we'll advocate for that if we feel it's right for the industry. So, we're also going to be represented on the Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs. Coming up shortly, Film Ontario will be presenting at that. And we also do obviously significant outreach to all the ministers, MPPs from all parties in a nonpartisan way to try and make sure that we deliver our message and make sure that we're advocating for the people in the city and for all of our members.
I just think there's going to be a tremendous amount of work to continue to advocate for what we submitted to get those recommendations. There's going to be lots of questions and continue to advance those requests every day. But I just want to acknowledge the the incredible collaboration and cooperation of our industry leaders. As Mayor Tory said, it's been very impressive to see everyone come together, and it's been a tremendous amount of work and hours that we've probably spent more time together, the industry leaders in the last couple months than we did in the previous year and a half. So thank you for all of you guys, John and others. So thank you.
Cynthia, do you want to do some questions or?
Sure do. We do have a lot of questions, so just want to remind people to submit their questions through the Q&A, and if we don't get to it live, because we do have a lot, just send me a follow-up email at clynch@filmontario.ca, and we will try and answer them separately. A lot of you had questions for the mayor that we didn't have time to get to, but we will do that. So this, David, I think this one is for you, and it's just asking for a bit of clarity around what we mean when we say asking for the residency requirements to be simplified.
I think on that one, we'd like to mirror the federal government, which is the initial year. So in the federal, for the federal tax credit, you have to prove that you're a resident or a federal resident for tax purposes in the year that you're working. With Ontario, the current rule is the year before. So you have to be a resident the year before December 31st of the year principal starts. So it's just having people recognized as a resident in that first year, and thereafter it would be the same as always. So Quebec has a more, Quebec and BC have more effective rules. So it's really to compete more effectively with them. So for example, if a student was hired out of a college and working in a visual effects or animation house, but they happen to graduate in Ontario but lived in another province, then that individual would be qualifying for the OCASE and for the production services domestic credit in that first year of working, as opposed to waiting a whole year for them to be eligible.
Thank you. And I'm going to direct this question to, it's a little bit not directly related to this, but I think relevant to people on the town hall, to John and to maybe Paul, both of you who attract business from outside the province. So we've noticed that Quebec and Manitoba and BC will be getting back to work a little bit sooner than we will here in Ontario. But do you feel that this will have a negative impact on the studios, or how do you feel this will impact us starting a bit later? So I'll throw that to both Paul and John.
I've been talking, Paul. If you want to take Paul off mute, I'm sure Paul will have something to say. So why don't we let Paul start here?
He's on mute though.
I think it's going to take Paul a second, John. So why don't you start,
Okay,
and then Paul can finish once he gets unmuted.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I think in all of our messaging, we've always said to government that we don't want to be way behind other provinces. You know, we wanted this, you know, our industry to be able to open up. You know, we obviously compete heavily with BC and with other states and other provinces, and so we didn't want to be way behind. I think right now, I don't personally feel like we are way behind, and as long as we can kind of get opened in a safe manner. I mean, everybody's dealing with a lot of the same international challenges here. For those who have read, you know, some of the production safety guidelines that came out from some of the major U.S. guilds, all of us in any jurisdiction are going to be forced with how do we manage things like testing? How are we going to protect our actors? How are we going to get safe workplaces? That's not really, like, I guess what I'm saying is I think in a way governments are going to be open before the industry may be ready to fully get back to work anyway. So I think we just got to continue to move forward. You know, our company and you know, we feel there's a lot of work that's going to come to Ontario. I think everybody we're talking to is extremely excited about getting back to work and getting back to work in this province, and they respect the amount of work that's been done to find, you know, safe ways to operate in this province. And I also think our leaders at the government level have done a good job managing this pandemic. And I'm actually very optimistic that when we can find a safe way to do it, that we'll be able to get back. But we need to just keep moving forward with our government partners like we're doing. So over to Mr. Brofman.
What was the, I got my mute button on. What was the question again? What was the question again, Cynthia?
Do you think that we here in Ontario will be disadvantaged given that some of the other provinces are opening up film production a bit?
No, I mean, not really. You know, there's going to be a bit of a time lag here, but we've got so much to offer here. So BC's got a bit of a head start. The domestic industry is coming back in Ontario earlier than the American, getting a few commercials in June, next couple of weeks, a few in July, but I don't think over the long term. Maybe there might be a month or two lag that Ontario is going to get back in, but the Americans are chomping at the bit to get up here. So if we can get that border opened at some point, but we're all ready to rock, and the camaraderie in this industry, second to none. Very proud of everybody. It's fabulous.
It's always great to have Paul answer questions because he always has such a positive outlook on the industry.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. We have to be.
I think in the interest of time, we will save some more questions to the end. And maybe Sue, if you want to flip over to the next section.
Okay, great. Thanks, Cynthia. So we want to spend a little bit of time talking about the health and safety guidelines. The mayor mentioned earlier in this call that we have been working together as an industry to develop those guidelines and to make sure that when we get back to work that we're going to be working safely. So I want to introduce Jason Mosek, who is the business agent for NABET 700, and Monty Montgomery, the business agent for IATSE 873. They are both FilmOntario members. And you know, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that health and safety is, you know, one of the most important issues that's on everybody's mind right now as we think about going back to work. I'll just say, you know, in ACTRA Toronto, we have held focus groups and town hall meetings on the kind of protections that performers, who are the most vulnerable people on set, will need to see to feel safe. So Jason, you are co-chair of the Industry Section 21 Health and Safety Committee. So can you tell us what's going to be in place when production gets the green light?
Sure. Thanks, everyone. Well, I think in a lot of ways, I think it's going to be sort of similar to, you know, when the Harvey Weinstein stories broke and the industry kind of stood up and took notice with respect to harassment and violence in the workplace. I think there's going to be a very concerted effort to ensure that people that are coming to set every day are safe. I think productions are going to be developing very stringent policies and protocols to make that happen. Obviously, we're going to be returning to work in a world where COVID still exists in society. So what steps are producers, employers going to take to mitigate those risks on their set? I think that they are going to craft those policies and procedures largely coming out of the Section 21 guidelines, which we are, touch wood, hopefully going to receive approval from the Ministry of Labor in the very near future. I cautiously and optimistically say that. I think that is really the document that people are waiting for to be able to craft their policies and procedures. I think, you know, those are something that, you know, all of the unions and guilds and whatnot are going to expect to see in place and want to be able to review before members are able to go to work and have input on. You know, I personally at NABET have had conversations with some of our producers and seen some drafts of the policies that they are looking at putting together and incorporating input from both myself as the head of the union, but also from various department heads on their production. I think the guidelines themselves, when they are released, it's to be understood that they are not a prescriptive document. They are an overview document that makes recommendations on a number of things that producers should turn their mind to in order to mitigate COVID in their workplace. They are not a document that says thou shalt do this or not do that. It makes a number of recommendations and things that people should turn their minds to, understanding that things are going to change based on the type of the show, the budget of the show, whether it's a show that's largely on location versus a show that's largely in studio. Those are things that are going to be factored into their policies and procedures.
So can you talk a little bit just about how the guidelines were developed? So, you know, who was part of that process and how did that work?
Sure. I guess first and foremost, people may not be aware, but there is the Section 21 committee that exists in Ontario. The Section 21 committee is a health and safety advisory committee that is sanctioned under Section 21 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And effectively what it does is it's an advisory committee to the Minister of Labor to advise on specific health and safety matters to our sector. Essentially, it's the Ministry of Labor's acknowledgement that we as an industry don't necessarily do things the same as other industries. It's kind of square peg, round hole type scenario. There's a number of things that we do that other industries don't. So the Ministry of Labor actually looks to us to tell them how we do what we do in as safe a manner as possible. People are probably familiar with the Section 21 guidelines that exist. These are the regular guidelines that cover off a number of other things, 45, I think, different things that we do on a daily basis. So that committee has been in existence for a number of years now. That committee consists of a number of unions and guilds, the various IA locals, 873, 667, 411, 634, Actor Toronto, DGC Ontario. As you mentioned, I'm the labor co-chair of the committee. Sean Porter from the CMPA is the management co-chair of the committee. We also have representatives from the Commercial Producers Association, from Ontario Creates, from the City of Toronto Film Office and the City of Hamilton Film Office, as well as obviously the Ministry of Labor itself. So that committee, you know, when kind of COVID broke or started to break, got together and struck a subcommittee to look at a number of protocols. You know, the various unions and guilds, producers, were all having discussions about when we return to work, what is it going to look like? How is it going to be different? How are we going to do what we do differently in this new world? Obviously, as John Weber mentioned earlier, a number of other jurisdictions started releasing various documents and kind of frameworks for how that work could be done in their jurisdictions. So this Section 21 committee here in Ontario, we decided to strike a subcommittee consisting of, I think it's 14 different areas of production. The subcommittee is actually larger than the Section 21 committee proper. I believe there was close to 30 people on the subcommittee. We struck these 14 working groups to look at different areas of production. The guidelines will be structured such that there will be the initial kind of intro section. We'll talk about things like screening. We'll talk about obviously the symptoms of COVID, policies and recommendations that producers should employ in terms of how to deal with COVID should it show up on their set. The use of PPE, the requirement to train the cast and crew on the use of PPE and their COVID measures that they will be employing on their production. So those groups met over the course of 1 week. Believe it or not, we had 14 working groups over the course of the week, and we were able to schedule them all without overlapping with one another. Each working group consisted of 1 or 2 union reps, 1 or 2 producer reps, also involved in the development of these guidelines. These COVID-specific guidelines were U.S. studio health and safety reps, as well as the AMPTP, the Contract Services Administration Trust Fund, which is sort of the health and safety body in the U.S. that oversees health and safety for the U.S. studios. We met over the course of a week and developed a first draft of these guidelines across these 14 different areas. As I said, there's an intro section, there's a section that deals specifically with issues that pertain to performers, and a section that pertains to construction, camera, and breaks it down, not quite on a departmental basis, but pretty close. I mean, it was, I think, a monumental task that the committee was able to achieve this over the course of a week to get that first draft up and running. The entire process took roughly about 4 weeks to get it to creation of the subcommittee, development of those 14 guidelines, second draft, third draft, and into the Ministry of Labor took about 4 weeks. Incredibly collaborative process. I mean, as I said, you know, Sean Porter is the co-chair of the Section 21 committee. Huge hats off to him and Dean Koronovic at the CMPA as well for kind of overseeing the administration or the administrative aspect of putting these guidelines together, as well as the scheduling aspect, literally herding cats. So again, huge hats off to them.
So you touched very lightly on some of the highlights of what's in the guidelines, and I'm wondering if you can maybe give us a little bit more detail, just in terms of the kinds of things that people can expect to see in those workplace policies that would adhere or abide by the guidelines.
Sure. I mean, like I say, it breaks it down by department. So depending on the department, there are specific things, again, recommendations that people should turn their mind to, like, for example, in transportation, how many people do you put in a vehicle? What sort of PPE does the driver wear? What sort of PPE is made available for those that they are picking up? How many people are they able to accommodate? Are people able to eat and drink in the vehicle while they're being shuttled to or from set? Those sorts of things. Testing, obviously, is something, like I said, I touched on that's on the intro section of the guidelines. And what producers may choose to implement in terms of testing procedures.
Okay, great. So I think, again, John and David raised earlier in this call that, our work on the advisory panel included, taking a look at the kind of recommendations that we could make sort of, short term, medium term, long term. And, one of the strong recommendations from the panel, and then, that FilmOntario will continue to support, is that, we need to be taking a look at what the costs are as productions get back to work. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about our submission around the standing committee. But Monty, this one's for you. What are we looking at in terms of the costs and what productions are facing just in terms of getting back to work?
Well, I mean, the cost will vary, obviously, depending on the size and the scope and the nature of the production. Whether it's a studio lock production or half and half on the road in the studio, those types of things will play factors. But estimates place the costs at somewhere between 5 and 15% increase to a production's budget. So it's not by any means a small amount of money needed to return from COVID. So at the provincial level, as David Carter mentioned earlier, we've highlighted that the government that it's absolutely crucial to provide support for these costs. So at FilmOntario, we're working on a proposal that will see the costs covered through the tax credit system that already exists. So some of the points to that are that we're assuming that the additional labor costs attributed to COVID are already covered by the existing tax credits. And in the Ontario Production Service Tax Credit, the cost of supplies should also be covered in the all spend credit. That's an assumption we're making. Obviously, the Ontario Production Service Tax Credit is an all spend that covers all different types of expenditures beyond just a labor tax credit. That the Ontario Film and Television Tax Credit, that's only a credit that covers 35% of labor costs. So we're also mentioning and requesting that instead of the regular 21.5% of tax credit costs being covered, we'd like to increase that 21.5% to a much higher number, specifically to cover the additional costs for COVID. So in the Ontario Film and Television Credit, the OFTTC, and in the OCASE credit, the Ontario Computer Animation and Special Effects Credit, we're asking that the costs of supplies being purchased, newly eligible costs due to COVID, be covered at a rate of 100%. So full coverage of those costs, because with that particular credit, those particular credits, it is labor costs covered only. So there's no additional costs and expenditures covered for those two credits. So they need a little more help. Obviously, while there's disadvantages for looking to use the current tax credit system to recoup these monies rather than upfront, there are some distinct advantages to doing it through the tax credit system. And that is that the government can deal with these things more quickly. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Really, to create funds and models, we can use what already exists. And unlike when you go to a fund model or a grant model, usually they put caps on funds or grants. And if we use the tax credit system that already exists, there'll be no caps to the amount of the expenditures or to who gets the credits. And of course, in addition to that, the proposal comes with a sunset clause, so that these additional tools to help us return to work are phased out after a certain period of time once we return to some kind of new normal.
So thank you, Monty. And I think that most of you can see that Minister MacLeod has joined us now. So welcome, Minister. So just for our members, we will get back to this conversation shortly, but we know the minister's time is limited. So I'm going to turn things back to Jennifer and Sue to welcome the minister. And good to see you again, and glad you could hear our pitch on tax credits there, Minister.
Thank you, Cynthia, and great time. And welcome, Minister, to our town hall. So pleased that that you are able to join us. I think, many of you who are on this call were also present at our annual general meeting last November when Minister MacLeod was fresh off a successful marketing trip to Los Angeles and laid out some plans that she had to grow our industry. Well, we find ourselves in, different circumstances as you, Minister, are celebrating your first anniversary in this role. And, even though none of us could have anticipated, what a challenging year this would be. Minister, you have been with us every day advocating on behalf of our sector and the other sectors in your portfolio. So in addition to the advisory panels, the minister has held 6 town hall meetings for many stakeholders across the province. And if you follow the minister's Twitter feed, you know that she is constantly meeting with stakeholders and MPPs looking for creative solutions to the current health and economic crisis. So, Minister, thank you for joining us today. And before we get to questions, I want to give you an opportunity just to provide some opening remarks.
Well, listen, thanks very much. I do appreciate it. I am in question period, so if the opposition gets up to rise on a question for me, I may have to leave. But I wanted to be here today just to say thank you to all of you from FilmOntario who have been so kind and generous with your time and your advice and guidance over the past year. As you rightly point out, this Friday is my 1-year anniversary in this ministry, and it has made me happy all week. I know that these have been very dark times, very distressful times. But I have been heartened throughout this entire process because of the wonderful people I've been able to work with in the creative classes that have supported these suite of sectors, our province, our economic growth, but just as importantly, and probably more importantly, our cultural fabric and our identity as Ontarians. And many of you have such a that extends actually to the Canadian national identity. So I want to say thank you. I recognize on the 12th of March, the life as we know it in Ontario effectively collapsed. Our economic, all I can say is our economic side of things within this ministry collapsed. I believe that our sectoral partners and industry partners are estimating that we're at about $21 billion in lost revenue immediately. Many of our artists, whether that's music, painter, and of course our artists on film and even those behind the scenes have suffered. And I know that these have been trying times. So I've tried to remain as transparent and accountable to you as I possibly can. And where we're able to make moves very quickly to ameliorate some of the issues that we're faced with, we are trying to do so in real time within the ministry, as well as with our agency Ontario Creates. I'm excited for what the possibilities will be post-COVID-19. I think we all recognize what the challenges are, but I do believe we are well positioned in a very strong position actually in film and television and animation post-COVID-19 as compared to other jurisdictions in Canada, as well as obviously in other parts of North America where they're dealing with the public health crisis, but also some other social issues and rampant racism in some of those communities that are unacceptable. And I think most people would feel safe in Toronto, in Ottawa, in North Bay, in Muskoka, and other parts of Ontario where we do have film-friendly locations. And I must say, throughout this process and throughout the telephone town halls, I think it's been important to expose different sectors within this ministry's responsibility to one another. So that, for example, our tourism community in Blue Mountain can now set their sights on creating a film commissioner and looking at some of the amazing assets that they have, and then pitching to folks like you for potentially coming up to do some filming in their areas. I think that there's a great opportunity for us to continue to wave the Ontario flag in the United States, particularly in Los Angeles and New York. And I've had the opportunity, obviously, to meet with a number of film executives over the past number of weeks to extol the virtues of not only our talent and our film-friendly locations, but also the stability of our tax credits, our desire to continue to support Canadian content, and finally, that that ability for us to live in a safe, free, and fairer environment. I know there is still a lot of work to do. I'm very cognizant of that. So I like to boast that we are the world in one province and we have a spectacular double bottom line. All of that has been challenged right now, but I have to say thanks to our Film and Television Advisory Panel, that work has been accelerated. They have given us a great report that we're starting to work on immediately. We also extended that panel to include IATSE, NABET, and ACTRA, and I'm looking at how we can integrate them into the full panel over the entire time of that advisory panel. And to those who were part of that advisory committee, I'm grateful. They have spent days, countless days over the past 14 weeks, making sure that your voice, your views, and your voices have been heard within the ministry. So again, I'm very grateful. I know many of you personally, and if I may say how thankful I am for your work over the past number of weeks. But I must say, in the past year, being in this portfolio, this has been a really great learning experience for me to get to know all of you, and I'm very grateful for that. So happy to take any questions, and I do apologize if I do have to get called out either for a question myself in the House or a vote.
That's great. Thank you, Minister. I think you know that we are all anxious to get back to work, and very pleased that film and television production is permitted in stage 2 in the provincial reopening. I know you've been asked this many times, but any insight into when we might see the rest of the province move into the rest of stage 2?
Yeah, obviously, I want to address phase 2 with film and television. That was something I fought for, and I want to say thanks to all of you. I know that, for example, John Weber and Jonathan Ahi and Jim Merkopoulos have been very helpful in providing me with insights of what production would look like. And so thanks to your members, I've been able to explain to my colleagues that this can be done safely. So that's was a fight, but we got there for phase 2. And then, of course, I think what you're most concerned about is Toronto and some of the surrounding areas that are still not in phase 2. I can assure you, we look at the best advice we've received from the medical experts of health, and we continue to review those. And each Sunday night, the Premier meets with the medical team and makes that assessment. So again, this coming Monday, we'll have a good sense of whether or not Toronto and other parts will move into phase 2, and but that will be completely based by the decision of the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, and then a decision taken by our cabinet. So I don't have a clear response. I just know that the second largest city in the province, Ottawa, which does have a great film-friendly location, obviously has been greenlit, as is other parts of the province, including Muskoka, where I was able to visit a couple of film-friendly locations on the weekend.
I think, to follow up on that, I know this came up on your last town hall call, but can you clarify for us about whether there are any restrictions on people traveling from, one part of the province to another in terms of, if they're not yet in stage 2, to work on productions in parts of the province that have already opened up?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think it would be up to the local chief medical officers of health and where they're coming from in terms of the movement inside and outside of their community. Secondly, I think it is up to the worker and the producer on whether they think that they can contain and be safe. I will tell you, as the minister also responsible for tourism, I have been on a tour since Friday. I started in my home city of Ottawa, then went into Leeds and Grenville and the Thousand Islands. Saturday, Sunday, I was in the beautiful riding of Muskoka, and just yesterday I was in Blue Mountain. And I plan on going to Niagara Falls on Friday for the grand reopening of our #1 destination in the entire country. So, I mean, I think I would consult with local chief medical officers of health in that regard, work with their local film offices, and obviously take the necessary precautions. I can tell you, as somebody who has had the ability to travel, I have been able to see the rigorous and stringent protocols that have been put in place by our local restaurateurs, hoteliers, a number of our tourism attractions. I think everyone understands we need to contain and prevent the spread of COVID-19. And that obviously we are dealing with a public health crisis first and foremost, but we are also dealing with an economic crisis and what I also deem the triple threat of the social crisis and getting people back to normal. So I certainly would say if there is an ability, the ministry, obviously my ministry, would be happy to work with you and the local medical officers of health on the ground to see if there is something that we can do in order to get you back onto the big screens.
Appreciate that. So we talked a little bit, and you mentioned it earlier about the work of the advisory panel, and very much appreciate the inclusion in that panel of IATSE, NABET, and ACTRA, and really do hope that we can continue to work on that advisory panel with you. Can you just talk a little bit about sort of what's happening now with the recommendations that are in the hands of the ministry? So what the process looks like from here on.
Great. Well, all of those recommendations from all 14 panels have started to be coalesced into one document by the ministry to see where there are similarities. Sometimes with respect to red tape, for example, it shows up in a number of the different panels. And so we're just trying to see how we can effectively do that. And we want to look and see if there are opportunities with other ministries to streamline things. So that work is being done now. My hope is that any of the low-hanging fruit we can deal with at the immediate term. Anything that is a bit more substantive, my hope is that I can speak with the finance minister and get some of this into possibly the fall budget. Which will be dealing with our responses. Having said that, I will be sending out letters of invitation to all of those panel members from the other 13 to ask if they would like to extend on an ad hoc basis their advice to me during this COVID-19 crisis. Having said that, the Film and Television panel actually does have a mandate to meet for 2 years into the fall of 2021. So we'll continue to work with them. I would consider this more of a COVID-19 disaster recovery report. And then I think as we start to stabilize, what is the longer term plan? And so we will be releasing sometime this summer a plan for the entire ministry, including film and television production, as well as animation.
I'm just going to get off mute there. Sorry, hope you have time for one more question.
Sure.
You're at Queen's Park now. I know that the standing committee is meeting and has been consulting on the impact of COVID-19 and the cost of recovery, and just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that process. FilmOntario hopes to be appearing in front of that committee later this month. So just what perhaps how we can support and how the members can support you and in advocating around the committee process.
Well, listen, certainly I think it's important. The Standing Committee sectoral review on tourism and hospitality had over 140 presenters. It was quite lengthy. I think it really opened a lot of people's eyes and minds to the challenges that our specific sector in tourism and hospitality have faced, and has come out with some pretty good results. In fact, the commercial rent eviction ban came as a result of that hearing. So I think that this is an incredibly important opportunity for film and television, as well as the entire cultural set of industries and arts, as well as sports communities, to come out and talk about the double bottom line, how much you are investing into our community, while at the same time how you're building the cultural identity of the province. And so I would encourage everyone on this call, obviously to support FilmOntario in their deputation, but I would also encourage you all to make your own deputation and really share the insights you have from the industry, the importance of this industry to the province. You think about last year, we grew or I didn't grow it, I'm just happy to announce it. You all grew film and television production in the province of Ontario by $200 million, from $1.9 billion to $2.16 billion. I think we were trending upward, and how do we get back to pre-COVID-19 levels? I think if you could provide those insights, it would be incredibly helpful for me, our ministry on Ontario Creates, as well as the entire government, and how we can best support you to get back to that level. And again, I just want to point out that the $200 million in growth from 18 to 19 happened as a result of domestic content. I think that's really an important story to tell for all of us in Ontario. So I would encourage you to be part of it, and I'm really looking forward to being part of that as well. I think it's a really good opportunity for us to showcase our pride of place and our pride of people in this sector.
As a domestic producer, I really appreciate your powerful support and expertise.
I'm not sure I have any expertise, but I'm very supportive.
Well, Minister, on behalf of the board and all of the members, I want to thank you very much for the time that you have spent with us today and for the incredibly hard work that you are doing on our behalf. We know that you are as committed to getting the industry back to work as we are, but making sure that we are back to work safely, and know that you are an incredible champion in terms of the stability of our tax credits here and the talent that we have in front of and behind the camera and our diversity, and that we are going to be a safe and healthy and respectful work environment as we get back to work. So, thank you so much, and we look forward to getting rolling and back to work with your support. So thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you very much. Stay safe, everyone. I'll look forward to seeing you when it's safe to do so.
We're very appreciative, Minister.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think since we were chatting there about the standing committee and appearing before there, and the minister's invitation that we should do what we can on that. Or perhaps Jennifer, we can go to you and Vanessa, and then we'll circle back to questions and for everybody and on health and safety as well. Does that sound okay?
Yep.
All right, over to you.
So I'd like to introduce Vanessa Steinmetz, Senior Vice President, Production Finance at E1, FilmOntario and CMPA board member. So now that we have health and safety guidelines, the Minister's Advisory Panel has made its recommendations. And as John and David alluded to earlier, the provincial government is conducting hearings and working towards a fall budget. Can you tell us a bit about what that process is?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Jen. And it was so great to hear from the minister and for her to tell us how important these processes are within government. So the Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs is currently doing a wide-ranging consultation on the impact of COVID-19 and what will be needed to bring the industry back to full force. The Finance Committee is made up of government and opposition members, and it's charged with all things that are money related. So this committee that usually conducts budget consultations and holds hearings on the budget when it's introduced. So they're currently doing the portion of the committee related to tourism. So they're hearing from tourism right now, and hearings on our sector will begin next week, starting on June 25th. So FilmOntario has requested to appear at the hearings and will be making a written submission to the committee. The submission will be the basis of our advocacy work going forward. So we will share it with all MPPs as we would normally do with a budget submission, and with the goal of getting widespread and all party support for our ideas. That concept of all party support is really important to us as a nonpartisan organization. And it also makes it easier for the government to support us. So if they know that they can introduce something and it's not going to be controversial, they're more than willing to do it. It also helps our minister if she knows she has support among the cabinet and the caucus colleagues.
And can you tell us what will be in that submission?
For sure. So we've touched on some of those things today already, the two high priority items that John and David spoke so well about. So health and safety costs and also insurance. Monty already outlined what the ask is on health and safety. On the issue of insurance, we're working with our industry partners at the CMPA on a nationwide approach. So as some of you know, the CMPA is working on an insurance proposal that would have the federal government commit $100 million reserve fund that would backstop claims related to COVID-19. So currently producers can get insurance, but it excludes COVID. this fund would provide that coverage for COVID-19. And what we're proposing is that Canadian producers would pay an additional fee or premium into a pool to cover COVID-related potential claims. The government backstop would then cover any amounts in excess that the pool couldn't cover. The program would be administered through either an insurance company or a separate private or government agency. The risk would be shared between producers and government, with each being asked to play their part. The proposal is to have this in place for about 2 years, with an option to renew at that time, depending on what the situation is. So FilmOntario is supporting the CMPA in this ask, and we'll be asking the provincial government to work with their federal counterparts to make it happen. We also ask that if the federal government cannot or chooses not to support this proposal, that it be implemented at the provincial level for Ontario producers, and of course, then the reserve fund would likely be smaller. In addition to the insurance and health and safety issues, some of the things we're going to put forward is a recap of what we've already discussed and recommendations that the panel has already made. So back to adjusting eligibility requirements for the tax credits so that all productions who were shut down remain eligible for the credit regardless of whether the production is completed or not. We also want to confirm that all shutdown and carrying costs are eligible expenditures for the tax credits. We're pushing for earlier payment on the tax credits. We're pushing for modernization of the triggers in the tax credit so that all online productions are eligible. David spoke about residency requirements that need modernizing, and that in particular will help support, we believe, the visual effects and animation sector, who have an incredible competition for talent. It's quite intense, and it would allow their companies to attract students and recent grads who are new to the province or the sector. The location fee issue continues to be a big one on the OPSTC credit, so we're still pushing for those to be eligible expenses, training programs, and the reinstatement of the IP program. So we're pushing on all fronts going forward and not going to be sidelined. You know, there's COVID, yes, but there's also, we have to keep going and maintain that the government really has to keep its commitment to the stable tax credits in Ontario.
Are there any concerns that as the province has to bear the increased healthcare costs and all the other costs of the economic shutdown, that there may not be an appetite for this kind of spending on our industry?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. So again, great to hear from the minister today, because she really demonstrates the understanding that when our industry is healthy, it makes an significant economic impact on the province, right? So a record-breaking $2.16 billion in direct spending in 2019. The ask around insurance and health and safety is a new cost, although you could argue insurance is a backstop. So if there's no claims, there's no spend. But yes, there are some new costs that we're asking for. But it's a cost that is needed to jumpstart us back to work. Also, the additional asks are aimed at reducing red tape and making the province more competitive with other jurisdictions. So that's something that, you know, we'll need to, we need to be more competitive, right? As other jurisdictions are also jumping back into work. We've also demonstrated to government that the tax credit is a net benefit to them. So for every dollar they spend, $1.20 goes right back into their coffers through taxes and other fees, and the economic impact of that dollar in the greater economy is about $7.40. So before the shutdown, Premier Ford often said he wanted to see us grow into a $5 billion industry. So now, hopefully they can see that while there may be some costs that we're asking for, that's the way to get there.
Awesome summary. Thanks, Vanessa.
Yeah, no problem.
Cynthia, do we have some questions?
Oh, we have tons of questions. So I thank you, Vanessa. That was really great. So somebody has just asked if there will be a link to the document. So once we make our appearance, I will fully admit the document is still in process, and we will incorporate some of the feedback we've gotten today, but we will post it and send it out to members once it is finished. The committee hearings are also televised, so if you have the Ontario Legislature channel or want to watch online, you can watch and cheer people on. So we have been getting a lot of questions, and this is not a directly provincial issue, but we have been getting a lot of questions about opening up the border and what are the implications of having to quarantine people if we can't bring Americans or people from other countries into the question. So I will just preamble this by saying and thanking the MPA, who have been doing a lot of work on this and clarified for us on the industry task force that if people are coming in for a business purpose, and that is a business that is allowed to operate, which film and TV is in parts of Ontario right now, then they should be allowed across the border. But they will be required to quarantine for 14 days once they get here, as would anyone else who is coming into the country, no matter where they're coming from. So with that, I think, and I warned that this would happen, but I'm going to ask Scott, who is also on the CMPA board, to provide a little bit more color on the advocacy on that issue. So over to you, Scott.
Great, thanks, Cynthia. So that's a pretty important issue across Canada, the CMPA, which I'm currently the chair of the board, and we have a number of board members that are on Film Ontario as well, are working on. And the question is, will it become an essential service? At what, how easy will it be to get across the border when you're dealing with border patrols that are dealing on one or case-by-case basis? So we have been advocating at the federal level to try to get some clarity and try to get that sorted out as quickly as possible so we can start carrying on business. And again, we also have the same issue going into different provinces. So whether you're going from Ontario to Newfoundland like we are on one show, and when those borders open and what are the protocols, the safety protocols that allow you to bring people from one jurisdiction into another. So that's part and parcel of the conversations we've been having on the health and safety. I was wondering if I could just step back for a little bit and talk at 10,000 feet. There's been a lot of questions in the Q&A about how do we deal with health and safety? How do we deal with issues where people aren't complying with the health and safety protocols? So if we go at 10,000 feet, I think you'll have heard today that Film Ontario has been working really hard to navigate these extraordinary times. And Film Ontario is a very unique organization in Canada because it brings the guilds, the unions, the producers, the studios, the suppliers together, and we can speak with one voice. And I think what's happened at Section 21 and wrangling that sort of process shows the benefit of having a working group of people that have the interests of the province and creating business at the top of mind. But I think this is a time that's going to really sort of put pressure on the relationship between the crews, the cast, and the producers. And I think I can say from the producers' side and from the CMPA side, we realize that the risk profile has changed dramatically from what it historically has been. We've just talked a little bit about the nervousness with respect to insurance cover for everybody, which allows a backstop. And we're talking about health and safety measures in a rapidly changing world where, does testing work? Are there false negatives? What are the best practices and what are the best practices for service production and American studios versus domestic producers? What can be financed, what cannot be financed? At the bottom of everything is how do we ensure everyone is healthy and safe and that we can continue business? Because the worst thing that could happen is that there's shutdowns during production once or twice or three times. So I think there's going to have to be an important social contract between all of us, the producers and everybody working. There's going to be health and safety protocols that have been vetted by medical and the unions and the producers about, and we're going to require strict compliance with those health and safety measures. And we're going to be looking to, one, educate and monitor cast and crew, everybody on set, on here's the new safety regulations that have to be complied with. And if you don't comply, there will be consequences because we cannot afford to put people at risk. So I think we're going to see a much different workplace, and we're going to require a much stricter standard of care for your fellow workers to make sure that everybody is safe. And we need everybody to work together on this, because it's not just a producer issue, it's an entire industry issue.
Indeed.
Thank you for that, Scott. So I think I'm going to just drill down a bit on some of what Monty and Vanessa talked about. We will be asking for health and safety measures put in place to be tax credit eligible. But a detailed question that maybe David Carter could help us answer, just to ask, when will this include, or will this eligibility extend, and with the caveat that this isn't fully developed yet, but will this tax credit eligibility extend to vendors if those vendors bill back to production? And is there anything people should keep in mind if they're trying to, or as we try and make those costs eligible? David.
Sorry, the question is for vendors? What do you mean by
Yeah,
that?
so if vendors have additional health and safety costs that they are then passing on to the production, would we include those in the tax credit eligibility? And they need to do things like make sure they're itemized in invoices or some other mechanism to make sure that they are tax credit eligible.
Can you hear me okay right now?
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. We hadn't actually considered that, a pass on of the costs to production, but that's interesting because of the unique ask. Now, the advisory panel in FilmOntario ask is slightly different on that front. On the advisory panel, we have asked for 100% coverage on domestic producers, but not on production services, foreign producers, where the ask is limited to 21.5% of the spend and the federal top up on the labor component. But that's an interesting point. If there's a direct cost, certainly on the visual effects and animation front, we've asked for the OKs to be included, for the OKs, for those additional costs to be OKs eligible so that the visual effects and animation houses can recover. But we had considered a cost from a vendor down to the production. It's an interesting ask, and we can explore that further. Did you hear me okay, Cynthia?
Yeah, thanks, David. I don't know if Vanessa, if you wanted to add anything to that. I certainly will take that homework away and work on it, and we can circle back on it for sure.
Yeah, nothing. No, I think we just have to think about it. I don't think it was considered in how we put our ask forward, so we'll have to take it back.
Thank you. Also, just want to turn to a question about PPE. So Jason and Monty, you might want to split this between you. So I think that we talked a little bit about the guidelines and whether or not they will require people to wear PPE on set. Maybe you want to elaborate on that a little bit. And then a natural follow-up to that is there a way, will there be some sort of centralized effort to source PPE, and will there be, is there any sort of resource that we can use to maybe make that easier to access industry-wide?
Sure. I think the guidelines, when they are published, you will see that they do cover off, obviously, when distancing cannot be achieved, then there is a need for PPE, obviously. That will largely be probably any film and television production. It will be difficult for a lot of the crew to stay more than 6 feet apart. In terms of a availability or database or sourcing of PPE in the guidelines, there is also information pertaining to resources that public health has made available on where PPE can be sourced in the province. And also the types of PPE. Are we talking about disposable surgical masks versus cloth masks versus N95 masks? All of those sort of criteria is covered off, and I think it depends on obviously the nature of the job that any one individual is doing, and also exactly what their proximity is to anyone else.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that, you know, I think the Section 21 guidelines are going to be quite helpful. There are numerous links contained within the document itself that really are effective in guiding people to areas on government platforms and other platforms that are really effective in helping people establish their policies. I was fortunate enough to have be part of the committee and have a draft of it with all the links. And to be honest with you, I used the Section 21 guidance document to create my office staff policy for IATSE Local 873. And I found it to be really slick, really easy, and really informative and helpful in doing that. So I expect that when these guidelines come out, that you'll find it to be the same when you're looking to drill down on your policies as well.
Thank you, gentlemen. Also in the realm of health and safety, but more related to performers. So Sue, I might put you on the spot with this one, but thank you. But just a question about the impact that maybe smaller cast sizes will have on the number of jobs available for actor members for sure. And sort of going forward, are there any sort of long-term plans that we can look forward to keep actors in the business and keep people feeling positive about the future of the industry? And I'm going to add an addendum to that. Did you want to talk a bit about some of the promotion work that ACTRA is doing?
Okay, so yeah, big questions. You know, I think one of the things that that the minister said, and that we've heard from other people, is that, you know, we expect to see Canadian production coming back before some of that service work, and you know, that's always good for, you know, Canadian performers. But you know, we are also working very hard with Ontario Creates to promote Ontario local talent for some of that service work that is going to be coming back up here. And, you know, we want to make sure that they know that we have the diversity and the experience and the depth of talent here for those roles that they are looking for. So I think that there's a, you know, there is a big job that we have always had and will continue to do with Ontario Creates and with the city, you know, in terms of helping to promote the talent that we have here and making sure that people know that some of those great shows that they have been watching during the time of this pandemic are made here with Canadian talent. So I think that's really really important. Yes, you know, we can expect that there will be fewer people working on some of those productions as we start up and people are putting those health and safety protections in place. But you know, we are a creative and an innovative bunch, and I think that, you know, as we find that the protections that we put in place are effective and working, and as Scott says, as we work together to make sure that that, you know, we are talking to each other and figuring out how we are, you know, communicating in this new world, that we will see people back to work, and you know, we will see a return to scenes that involve more people and involve stunts and involve some form of intimacy. But it's going to be tough. And it's going to take us a while to get there, and it will, you know, frankly, take a while before I think, you know, performers are going to feel confident, and that, you know, that the people that they are working with will be able to help them to feel confident in these new, one hopes, safer, healthier work environments. So, you know, we're cautiously optimistic, and obviously, you know, we'll be putting, you know, a lot of emphasis on our work in terms of promotion and helping our members be ready and visible as producers are looking for talent here.
Thank you, Sue. I'm going to combine a couple of similar questions. A few questions about what is going to be done about location shooting. So Jason or Monty, did you want to address sort of what the specific health and safety considerations are? And then I think when we were losing David, that may have been one of the panel recommendations that kind of got garbled. So David, if you wanted to just reiterate what some of the recommendations were from the panel on supporting location shooting. So Jason or Monty, if you want to go first, and then over to David.
Sure. I think Jason's, are you still there, Jason? Oh, there you are.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Go
ahead.
Okay. Obviously, when it comes to shooting on location, there's different issues that have to be addressed when it comes to health and safety. It's a lot more difficult from a logistical standpoint to set up screening and controlling exits and entrances, and in some cases interaction with the public, which is creates another risk element to the workplace when you involve the public element. So Section 21 does speak to certain location specific and studio specific recommendations. And, it gives some guidance in that regard. But ultimately, like Jason mentioned earlier, the guidelines are just that. They're guidelines, and shows are going to have to look at their specific needs to a specific location and come up with solutions and scenarios, working with their cast and their crew, of course, and consulting, that those things get a location by location basis.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what Monty said, I mean, the guideline does require production to bear in mind things like, if you are going to be looking at a location, has the location been cleaned in advance? Maybe perhaps consider a questionnaire for the people you're going to be renting the location from. Are we talking about a house versus a restaurant or some sort of hall or something? What sort of precautionary measures should be taken by production before crew are allowed to access that location? Things like washrooms, things like portable hand washing stations, ensuring that there's enough of those, proper ventilation, proper airflow at the location. That's all taken into consideration in the guideline.
And David, did you want to, or David or John, did you want to just do a quick recap of what the panel's recommendations were about location fees and that kind of stuff?
I'm happy. I mean, there was a couple as it related to locations. One was a recommendation around reducing the no commercial filming policies on some of the government locations, places like the courthouse, Queen's Park, some of the government buildings to make more locations available to the industry. Another one was looking at making location fees eligible for the tax credit to reduce the costs of locations, particularly as they become more expensive as we try to put the proper protocols in place around that. So those were two of the recommendations that were part of the committee specific to locations.
So our time is up. Remember, if we did not get to your question today, please send it to clynch@filmontario.ca and we'll address it. I want to thank all of our esteemed colleagues on the board, as well as all of our panelists today, as well as all of the people behind the scenes managing the Q&A. And of course, Cynthia.
And I want to thank all of you members for everything you do to support Film Ontario and to support each other in this time and in helping to make us a strong industry. I hope that people are feeling a little bit optimistic as we get ready to go to get back to work and get ready to roll. And as we heard from the mayor and the minister, You know, they are saying to us that we should be ready soon, knowing that there are lots of challenges ahead, but that you know, working together, we will see this industry grow and get back to work safely. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe and stay in touch from a nice, safe physical distance. And again, if you have any questions, please get in touch with Cynthia at FilmOntario. Thank you, board. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye, everybody. I hope my tongue, I realized that I ate a piece of 85% chocolate. So my tongue is totally black on my lips. So
We can't see.
Okay.
That was the best chocolate, though.
Yeah, it is. So thanks everybody.
Before you hop off, there was a question about the painting behind you.
Oh, the painting behind me is just a Toronto artist. His name is Thrush Holmes. Nobody famous, but he's a local Toronto artist. Thrushholmes.com or CA.
I will put that in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah. Nice to see everybody. Bye, Jane. Bye, Vanessa.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.